Wine Industry Network's 2024 Bold Prediction Series is presented by Heffernan Insurance Brokers, with supporting sponsors Protea Financial, Turntine Brokerage, and American Ag Credit. Thank you for your support.
Hi, Liz Bishop
and Deborah Costa
here from Heffernan Insurance Brokers, and we are your fire mitigation and insurance
gurus.
This wildfire structure protection unit is a unit that the British Columbia government has been utilizing for about 10 years. And in 2023, there were 500 structures that were saved by this unit. So it has proof of concept.
Here today, we have Adam Iveson from Ember Defense to share with you a few important notes about this structure.
So this is a structure protection unit. This has everything on board to be self-sufficient. This has pumps, sprinklers, hose lays, bladders, everything to be off the grid to protect your property ahead of an oncoming wildfire.
Liz and I, in partnership with Ember Defense, are committed to protecting your winery property. Just think, if everyone invested in a wildfire protection unit, together we could ensure that wineries don't burn and make insurance affordable again. Text WASP Demo to 707-789-3062 for a free demo on your property.
Hey everyone, George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another one of our sessions for our Bold Predictions webinar titled New Regulations Impacting the Wine Industry. Today we have Noelle Kramers with the Wine Institute, and she's going to dive in a little bit into some of the details around the new Vineyard and Winery Order. There's a lot going on. This is going to be a really informative presentation. I think you're going to really enjoy it. As is always the case, we pre-record these sessions. We do that for quality purposes, but it also allows us to have some really great engagement with our speakers while you're actually watching the presentation. So Noelle's going to be watching the presentation right along with you. So as questions come to you, go ahead and submit those into the chat, and Noelle will pick those off as they come in. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsor, Heffernan Insurance Brokers, along with our supporting series sponsors, Protea Financial, Turntine Wine Brokerage, and American Ag Credit. Thank you for all your support. And of course, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be with us today. Noelle, welcome.
Thank you, George. And good morning, everyone. I wanted to come and speak today to share information about some new regulations that the wine industry is facing. And as George mentioned, there's always new regulations. The two that I'm going to talk about this morning have to do with water quality. One is specific to wineries, and the other is specific to vineyards on the North Coast. So to give a little bit of background on California's water quality rules and why we are where we are on the North Coast with the Vineyard Order, is California law has requirements for any time you're discharging a waste into a waters of the state, which is pretty much any water body. And waste is pretty much anything. It can be a piece of sand, it could be sewage, it could be any number of pollutants. And if you do that, then you need to have a permit to do that. Now, in addition to the Porter Cologne Water Quality Act, California has adopted its non-point source policy, which governs how it regulates non-point sources. And that means pollution that's coming from a broad source rather than a pipe, essentially. And then California has also adopted an anti-degradation policy, which generally states that if we have high quality waters, those waters need to be kept at that high level of quality and not have pollution that degrades that quality. So those are sort of some general requirements around the rules for water quality regulation. Then California has been going through the process of adopting rules for irrigated agriculture. One of the earlier requirements was adopted in the Central Valley region. So let me take a step back. California is divided up into 9 regions, and each regional board then governs water quality within that region. So the Central Valley is governed by the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. So they adopted the East San Joaquin River Watershed WDR for irrigated lands. And when a regional board adopts a requirement, the public has the opportunity to petition the state board for review if they think that the regional board got something wrong. So that's what happened in the situation for the East San Joaquin WDR for irrigated lands. That was petitioned to the state board. Then when the State Water Resources Control Board takes action and makes a decision on that petition, that decision generally becomes precedential. So when the state board ruled on the East San Joaquin River watershed WDR, it then set standards for irrigated lands programs throughout the state. So all irrigated lands programs that are adopted after 2018 have to meet the precedents that were set under that East San Joaquin order. Then, we have general policies, we have the East San Joaquin precedents, and then each region can set its own individual policies for specific water quality concerns that they have. So Region 1, which is the North Coast region, has its own sediment TMDL, and TMDL stands for total maximum daily loads, which is setting sort of a standard for limits of discharges of a particular pollutant. So in this case, it's sediment. So there's a sediment TMDL policy and then also a temperature policy. So any water quality permit that the North Coast region is adopting has to follow all of these requirements. So all the state laws, the state precedents, and then its own region's policies. So to go back to the East San Joaquin order precedents, what it said is essentially that all irrigated lands regulatory programs have to follow these requirements. So there have to be management practices that are reported to the regional board. There's specific nitrogen management and reporting requirements. There's a requirement for sediment and erosion control practices that they be included in the irrigated lands programs, requirements to monitor on-farm drinking water wells. There's requirements around a lot of groundwater quality requirements around trend monitoring and then establishing formulas, values, and trends to protect groundwater. So that means that when the North Coast Regional Board is adopting its irrigated lands program, these are the provisions that have to be included due to the precedent set by the East San Joaquin order. So now to get to provide just a picture of exactly where the North Coast Regional Board is. So you can see the 9 regional boards here and how they're divided. And then the map here is meant to show exactly where the dividing line is between Region 2, which is the San Francisco Bay region, and Region 1, which is the North Coast region. So you can see Santa Rosa here, Rohnert Park and Cotati are here, Sebastopol, here's the Sonoma-Marin line. So the North Coast region includes the very northern part of Marin County and the northern part of Sonoma County. So here's Sonoma here, Glen Allen, Kenwood. So this gives you a sense of sort of where, and here's Petaluma, so that you can see where the dividing line is. So essentially, the regional boards are divided by topography, because you have to think about where the water will be draining. So when you're kind of go over that grade on Highway 101, once you're on the other side of that, you're in the North Coast region. When you're south of that, you're in the San Francisco Bay region. So now to talk specifically about the North Coast Vineyard Order and what is being proposed and the timeline for adoption of that order. So the North Coast Regional Board released a draft Vineyard Order last June. Then they took public comments and held a public workshop in August. Staff then reviewed all those public comments last fall, and they had a public meeting in January to present potential revisions that they're considering. Then staff spent much of the winter in February and March touring numerous vineyards to get a better sense of what they were proposing and how that would impact vineyards, so that they could get an understanding of what vineyards looked like in the winter, looking at drainage structures, understanding practices that are happening in vineyards during that time period. Then they're going to be holding a technical advisory group meeting in May, and then holding a public workshop in June to continue to provide, allow the public an opportunity to provide input as the staff work to develop that permit. Their plan is to release the proposed order in late October, with numerous revisions based on all of this, the vineyard tours and the conversations that they're having with the public and at the public meetings. Then the plan is that the board would adopt the vineyard order over a 2-meeting process. So a December meeting in December of 2024, and then a February meeting in 2025. Now, this timeline is not set in stone and could be pushed back, but that is what they have told us currently is their plan moving forward with the vineyard order. Now to get into some of the specifics about what's included in the vineyard order. So it would apply to commercial vineyards in the Big Navarro and Garcia watershed, the Gualala Salmon watershed, and the Russian River watershed. Any vineyards that are outside of those 3 watersheds would have to comply with the order, but they wouldn't have to submit enrollment documents or conduct monitoring or report on that monitoring. So it would be a much simpler process for any vineyard that's outside of those 3 watersheds. But the vast majority of vineyards on the North Coast region are in those 3 watersheds. So the requirements for the vineyard order include requirements about what's happened within the planted area, requirements for stream crossings, requirements for roads, and then essentially prohibitions within streamside management areas. What the original order included was a winterization period from November 15th to April 1st. And then within that time period, so during the winter, the vineyard order was proposing numerous prohibitions on activities during the winterization period. So you really couldn't go in and have any impact on, like, no ground disturbing activities during the winter. You couldn't use seasonal roads during the winter, and no installation of new ag drainage structures. Then in the streamside area management areas, it depended on the water body, but it could be up to 50 feet. So from a pond or a stream, you would have a 50-foot area where you couldn't remove any riparian vegetation, no new commercial vineyard installation within the streamside area. So you could continue to farm the vines that are there now, but during a replant, you would be prohibited from replanting within the streamside management area. No construction happening, no storage of chemicals, no storage of construction materials or trash, no application of chemicals, and no grading or other ground disturbing activities. Now, all of these areas were proposed in the order that was released last summer. But based on the conversations and the feedback that was provided, we expect there to be rather significant changes. So stay tuned, and we'll see later in the fall this year as to exactly what is being proposed. Then there's also monitoring requirements. So there's surface water monitoring requirements that were proposed for ag drainage structures, in-stream turbidity monitoring, stream bed monitoring, and monitoring for pesticides. And then because of the EC and Joaquin precedents, there also were requirements for groundwater monitoring of nitrates, pesticides, developing trend monitoring, and developing a groundwater protection plan. The reporting that was proposed to under the vineyard order was a farm evaluation, and then reporting an irrigation and nutrient management plan. And a lot of the information would be reported to a third party. So growers could sign up to participate with a third party, report to the third party. The third party would then aggregate that information and report it to the regional board. And that would allow for some anonymity of the information being shared. So that's it for the vineyard order. There's a lot of moving parts there, so stay tuned on that one. But I wanted folks to be aware of what's going on and what's being considered, so you're not blindsided when that gets released later this year. Now moving on to the winery order. So earlier when I talked about the regional boards generally have jurisdiction over setting standards and permit requirements for discharges within their region. The State Water Board also has the authority to adopt orders. And in some cases, rather than leaving those decisions up to the regional board, they take that responsibility on themselves. So in the case of the statewide winery order, that's what happened. The State Water Resources Control Board decided that it was best to have one statewide order that applied to wineries throughout the state and is then implemented by the regions, but all of them have the same requirements. So the State Water Board adopted the statewide winery order in January of 2021, and they gave wineries 3 years to come into compliance unless they were already covered by an existing regional permit. It applies to wineries that discharge between 10,000 gallons and 15 million gallons of processed water annually. And I'll go into more detail about what that means for wineries outside of those areas or that level of discharge later. So wineries that are not currently permitted by the regional board have to submit an application to their regional board to get coverage under the statewide winery order by January 20th of 2024. So if you're listening to this and you don't have an existing permit for your winery and you haven't already submitted that notice of intent to get permitted under the winery order to the regional board, please do so as soon as possible because you've missed the deadline. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But this is important to know that if you don't have a permit now, you needed to have applied by January 20th, 2024. Those wineries that are already permitted by their regional board have more time to comply. They have to continue remaining in compliance with the regional general order or their individual permit. But they will then at some point in the future be asked by their regional board to come into compliance with the statewide winery order. So just sit tight and wait until you get contacted by the regional board, at which point you'll sign up for the statewide winery. Now, the winery order has numerous requirements. These are some of the high-level requirements included. There are numerous standards within the winery order, and it requires that you come into full compliance with those standards within 5 years, because there could be some significant upgrades that are required to the operation. And so the order gives time for wineries to make those investments to come up to those standards. There are specific requirements around pond capacity and pond lining, around land application area, so how much water is being applied there or solid application in the land application area, and then also around subsurface disposal systems. Now, here's how the tiers are broken down, because the requirements of the order can be specific to the winery's size. So those wineries that discharge less than 10,000 gallons of processed water annually are exempt from the order, so they don't have to comply. Now, there can be situations where a regional board determines that there's a high concentration of these exempt wineries that could have an impact on water quality, and they may then require exempt wineries to enroll as if they were tier 1. But in most cases, wineries under 10,000 gallons of processed water will be exempt from the requirements. Then tier 1 is from 10,000 gallons to 30,000 gallons. Tier 2 is from 30,000 to 300. Tier 3 is 300 to 1 million. And tier 4 is 1 million to 15 million. The tier 1 wineries have the simplest compliance process. They have less monitoring required and less reporting required of them. Tiers 2 through 4 have very similar requirements and have extensive monitoring and reporting requirements included in that. Tier 4 wineries, in addition to the surface water monitoring that's required and the subsurface disposal system and land application area monitoring, they also have to monitor groundwater. And then if you have a winery that produces more than 15 million gallons of processed water annually and discharges all 15 million gallons, you will have to be permitted individually, because you're not subject to the statewide winery order, but you will need an individual permit. And the regional board will conduct that permitting process. Now, on the monitoring requirements, as I mentioned, there's a lot of monitoring requirements for wineries, but for tier 1, that 10,000 to 30,000 gallon size, all that's required of them for monitoring is calculating the daily flow, so that they understand how much water is moving through the winery as in the winemaking process. Then tiers 2 through 4 have extensive monitoring requirements. They have to monitor source water, winery effluent, pond monitoring the effluent that's going to the land application area, monitoring within the land application area, monitoring the subsurface disposal system, monitoring the effluent that's going to the subsurface disposal system, monitoring solids, and then, as I mentioned, tier 4 wineries are subject to groundwater monitoring requirements. Now, the link here is to Wine Institute's website. We have compliance tools. So there's spreadsheets that document and help a winery understand all the requirements of monitoring, because the order itself is extremely extensive. And all of the monitoring requirements they're not always located in the same spot within the order. So Wine Institute took all of them and put it in one place to help wineries better understand what's required. And this is available to anyone. You don't have to be a member of Wine Institute, although we would love to have your membership if you are a winery in California. But we just want to make sure that all wineries have that information available to them to make sure that they're in compliance with the winery order. Then for the reporting requirements, it looks like tier 1 has a lot of reporting requirements, but these are fairly simple. So there's compliance letters required. If the winery determines that they were out of compliance with anything, you have to send a letter notifying the regional board of that. Submit an annual report, which would include a map of the winery flow, the days of operation, any violations that happened during the year. If there were expected changes to the winery operations that may change the flow rates, and then a description of any modifications begun or completed during the year. So that's what's reported from tier 1 wineries. Then tiers 2 and 3 have to do the same requirements as tier 1, plus they have to report all the monitoring results from that list of monitoring requirements from the previous slide. And then tier 4 has to do the same as the other tiers, plus they have a semi-annual report. So they're reporting twice a year rather than just once a year. And their monitoring results also have to include groundwater monitoring. Now, the reason there's an asterisk by March 1st is because in the winery order, there are actually 2 different dates for the deadline for submitting the annual report. So in one section of the order, it says that the annual report is due March 1st. And in another section of the order, it says the annual report is due April 1st. The State Water Board has told us that they will not ding any winery who doesn't meet the March 1st deadline. They're going to use the April 1st deadline, despite the fact that the order says March 1st in one place. So no, maybe aim for March 1st, but know that you have until April 1st to submit that. Then here's the implementation schedule. If you remember, I mentioned that if you don't have a permit, your deadline was January 20th, 2024. But then for wineries that are permitted under either existing regional general orders or individual permits, they have more time and they have to wait until the regional board contacts them. So this is the timeline that we've been provided by the North Coast and San Francisco Bay region as to how they're implementing the winery order. So their both pretty much every region in the state, first priority is unpermitted facilities. Then they're moving on to the permitted facilities, and they have different sort of time schedules. So on the North Coast, their first phase of existing wineries with permits will be those wineries that are covered under the 2002 winery WDR. Then they're going to move to wineries with individual WDRs, and WDR stands for waste discharge requirement. Then they'll move on to wineries that are covered under the conditional waiver for low threat discharges. And that waiver has an expiration date of December 2027. So expect that you will be asked to sign up under the statewide order prior to that expiration. Then they're going to move on to the wineries with the wine, beverage, and food processor WDR. And finally, they're going to be moving on to those covered by the wine, beverage, and food processor waiver with a February 2026 expiration. I don't know why they have the waiver and that's expiring in 2026, asking those wineries to sign up after those that have the waiver that expires in 2027, but that's what they've communicated to me. Then in San Francisco Bay, in that region, so that's Southern Sonoma and Napa and Contra Costa and Alameda counties. So the Napa permitted facilities are being treated a little bit differently because Napa County has its own program. And Napa County has been working on an MOU with the regional board to allow for it to continue to offer coverage to its permitted wineries. So those, if you are in Napa and you have a current permit with Napa County, then you will continue being covered by that. But make sure you had to have told the county that you wanted to continue because they gave you an additional 3 years to stay under their county program. So those of you that got that letter, responded, are signed up with Napa, you have 3 more years. And then the regional board outside of Napa, as I said before, will focus first on wineries that don't have permits. Then they're going to focus on wineries in areas with existing levels of nitrate contamination in the groundwater. So that's wineries generally in the Livermore area. And then they'll be working with those that have individual permits as well. So I know that was a lot of information about both the Vineyard Order and the Winery Order. Happy to answer any questions. If you didn't already put them in the chat, enter them now and I can answer them. Here also is my email address and phone number. If you have any questions that you think of after this presentation and want to get in touch with me, or you have a very specific question that you'd rather have me answer directly rather than putting it in the chat, feel free to reach out. But George, thank you very much for having me today. I appreciate the chance to share what's going on with these regulations. I know it's a lot for folks to keep their eyes on and know what's going on. So thanks for letting me share the current situations.
No, thank you, Noelle. That was really terrific. I had one quick question for you. Back to the Vineyard Order, there's a lot, sounds like a lot of moving parts still in place there. So for people that want to stay up on any new changes with regard to that, is there another place that they can do they just monitor the Wine Institute website for any updates with the Vineyard Order?
So the best place to monitor is actually the North Coast Regional Board's website. You can sign up for a listserv to get emails from them when they have new information about the Vineyard Order or when they're having public meetings. So they have information on their website for the Vineyard Order, a specific website, like a page on their website. And that's the best way to stay on top of the changes with that. Because yes, there will be a lot of changes upcoming this year.
Terrific. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. And encourage everyone in our audience, if you have any questions, to get a hold of Noelle. If you haven't got yourself signed up, you better take care of that quickly. Thanks for being with us. And once again, thank you to all of our sponsors for their support.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.